In this video, I want to talk about startup companies' hidden agendas. For some of you, it might be pretty obvious, but I think for most people, it's actually kind of a hidden agenda that you don't really think about because you just work there and you just want a job and you just want to be part of something where you have influence over the product. So most startups these days aren't bootstrapped anymore. Most startups have venture capital, which means they have investors, angel investors or venture capitalist firms, which give them money. And then they usually over leverage that money, which means they're just making a big bet. And that's why you see a lot of startups fail. They took a big risk by growing insanely fast, and then just one little thing went off with their plan and they had to let go of a bunch of people. That's what I mean when I say you've over leveraged. And so whenever you're looking at a startup and you see the word hypergrowth, that's not really a good thing. That probably means that they're seeing some potential and they're hiring everyone really quickly to see if they can take advantage of that potential, but it doesn't mean that they're actually growing that fast. They're probably just trying to get as much work out as fast as possible, and they're burning as much money as fast as possible on the hope that it pays off. And if you don't know, 9 out of 10 startups fail. So if they offer you equity, which could be your chance to walk away with millions of dollars, you have a 90% chance of that being worthless. Also, most equity at startups is vested, which means, let's say you get like 1% of the equity, which would be insane, but let's say you get 1% of the company, you only get 0.25% of that every year. So I'm going to tell you the goal of almost every single startup, which again, I think a lot of people new to the industry might not be aware of. Most startups, especially in Silicon Valley that take venture capital, they want to have a successful exit because that's what their investors want. The investors want their money back at some point, and they want more money than they put into it because they gave you that initial boost. Now, some of you might be thinking this is common sense, but it's actually not. I think a lot of us go to a startup that's revolutionizing an industry or disrupting an industry thinking that it's going to be the next Facebook or the next Google. But that's not what the goal of most startups are. The goal of most startups, especially in Silicon Valley, is to be acquired by Google or to be acquired by Facebook. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's just a few things that you should be aware of, especially if you're an employee, meaning that you may or may not have a job when this acquisition comes. They come and buy the software, and then they fire everybody and they acquire and fire. Google's pretty notorious for this. They do this with a lot of technologies, and we're going to buy your IP because we don't want to build it, and then we're just going to fire everyone and we're going to do what we want with it. Let me walk you through how this works. So if you're at a startup right now and you're looking at being acquired or you're looking at merging with another company is what they'll say, so you don't freak out as a worker. At my last company, they were doing this. My boss told me that we were being courted by a larger company looking to purchase the company, which really meant they just wanted to purchase the software that we made. If that purchase did happen, the CEO would have walked with $30 million and everyone at that company would have been let go eventually, if not immediately. But that really depends on your CEO. Anyways, so a company comes in and they court your company, and this usually happens behind the scenes. So usually you're not told that a merger or an acquisition is happening until the last second, because if you're an employee at a company and you know that you're about to get bought out by another company, you would realize that I might not have a job anymore. They might just want to be buying what I'm building, and they already have their own employees that are going to take over and they don't need me anymore. Maybe they have some employees that they're paying less than you that can do your job, and they're just going to move those people onto your job. All of the acquisition stuff of a startup happens behind the scenes for a long while before they ever announce it. By the time they've announced that they're looking at an acquisition, the chances are they've already signed on the dotted line. Once a purchase does happen, a common thing that these companies do that buy other companies is that they make the CEO stick around for a year or two, not to freak anyone out. So the acquisition happens, and then all that you see immediately is your email domain change. So it's normally at yourcompany.com, but now it's at theircompany.com, and now you have to change a couple logins or something like that. Nothing immediately changes, but your CEO is sticking around, so everything seems normal. You know, that's strategic. That's on purpose because they don't want you to know that everything is just gotten transitioned, and chances are you're not about to have a job, because if the CEO wasn't around and the CEO just jumped ship, you would probably jump ship too. And if everyone, including the employees, did that, then the software would most likely take a dive, and the person who just bought your software doesn't want that to happen. They want it to be maintained. They don't want people leaving with intellectual property or proprietary secrets or knowledge that other people don't have. So they try to keep things as DL as possible. So if you're at a company and you say, we've just been acquired, but don't worry, the CEO is still sticking around and we're still ourselves. Chances are the CEO probably signed on the dotted line to stick around for a year, and then he walks away with his millions while he's still making a fat salary. Now, once your ownership has been transferred to another person, this is so weird to talk about, but that's what it is. Once your paycheck ownership has been transferred, you are now at the mercy of whatever your CEO in that company wrote behind the scenes in the playbook. So when the negotiations were going on, if you have a good CEO, he might say, all right, look, can you at least move my people at my company into your company instead of just firing them right away? Or they might say, well, look, can you just keep them around for 6 months before you fire them? Or they might say, all right, look, if you fire them, can you give them some sort of severance package? But it really depends on your CEO and what goes on behind the scenes between the big company and how much your CEO cares about you. A lot of CEOs don't give a shit, so they'll just say, yeah, here, let me get my money, I'll sign on the dotted line, but I'm just going to AFK until I get my millions. And again, this is known as acquire and fire. And this is the goal of almost every single startup. They don't want to be the next Google, they don't want to be the next Facebook or Microsoft, they just want to be bought by those companies. No one's looking to maintain themselves. There are a few startups that grow into this big conglomerate like Uber or Airbnb, which are somehow startups, even though they're not startups anymore, they just haven't been acquired. And so their investors haven't made all their money yet. So what can also happen if you don't get bought is that you have an IPO, an initial public offering, and you go on the stock market, and then people can invest there, and then the investors make their money back that way. Most people just want to be acquired because that's the easiest way to walk away with a bunch of money. The investors get their quick buck, even though it took a few years to get it back, but they don't have to deal with a stock market and a stock exchange. And what usually happens after that is the CEO that sold his company now has $30 million, and he becomes an angel investor into another company, and the whole cycle just repeats. That's like the Silicon Valley virus. And the thing is, the startup culture has spread to companies throughout the United States that aren't startups. Companies that have been around for a while, companies that aren't looking to get bought out. Small companies, mid-sized companies, even larger companies are adopting startup culture when they have absolutely zero intent to ever be bought out. I'm sure a lot of you guys watch the corporate cringe stuff that I post, and we could just go over a few examples of how Silicon Valley has caused almost every single other company in the US and across the world to adopt these stupid startup tactics that just don't have any place. Here's a good example. So everyone looks to what Google's using or what Silicon Valley is using for a tech stack. Are we using MERN? Are we using Mean? What's the latest and greatest new hotness that we don't really need, but that's what they're using, and they just got bought out by one person for $1 billion. And what these other companies across America are hearing is survivorship bias, because for every one company that gets acquired and has a successful exit as a startup, there are 9 other companies that died. Another example is work culture. Generally, they don't have a lot of money because they're just using investor money. They don't actually have cash flow in the business. They're using up money in the bank, which is called a burn rate, and they don't have a lot of money. So instead, they offer perks like food and sleep pods and couches and beer Fridays and whatever, right? Because they can't pay you more. So they just give everyone perks that are cheaper, which kind of take away from that. But there are companies across the United States that could pay you more, but instead, hey, we're going to adopt not doing that and just give you perks too. And it's like a whole trade-off. If you work at a startup, you accept these perks because you're taking the 10% chance that it might pay off and you get $1 million one day. That should be the trade-off. It shouldn't just be, let's do it because let's do it. You are going to give a lot more hours of your time at a startup than you would at a regular 9-to-5 job. Another thing that Silicon Valley is notorious for is taking the simplest things and giving them cutesy, complicated pet names. So for example, I have a picture here. She says, "This morning we launched the Just Eat Power Hour. Our colleagues told us while in lockdown they were on back-to-back calls and found it difficult to take a break away from their screen. That's not how we roll, so we've introduced the Power Hour. It's designed for just eaters," so again, they're naming their people that work there pet names, "to have guilt-free time away from meetings, have lunch with family, go for a walk, social distance, exercise, just breathe. It's their time. Another way we continue to brilliantly enhance the lives of just eaters everywhere." And then if I zoom out, you can see that it's just, you've invented the lunch break. So they take something normal, they take something that everyone does, and they give it some complicated name, and they say that, look at what we're offering, we're different. Like, wow, you gave your employees a break. Another one is tech stack interviews. Ben Awad made a video on this called Coding Interviews Are Broken. I suggest you go watch that video, but they look at what Silicon Valley is doing to interview people for code jobs, and they say, okay, let's do that. But they never say, well, is this what the person's actually going to be doing at the job? Like, does this make any sense? No, data structures and algorithms. That's what Google does. That's what all these other startups are doing. We're just going to do that, even though it doesn't make any sense. No one ever stops and says, hey, why are we doing this? Does this fit our company? Or are we just doing this because Silicon Valley is doing it? It's like corporate peer pressure. Realize that if you work at a startup, the goal of your CEO, however small the company is, the goal of your CEO, because he has investors most likely, unless you're bootstrapped, he has investors, and the goal is to give all the money his investors gave back to him and more, and then walk away. And whatever happens to you, happens to you. So my recommendation, go to a startup if you want to learn how a business works, because you'll be able to do marketing, you'll be able to do some of the design, you'll be able to do all kinds of jobs that was not on your initial application. But just realize the CEO needs to pay back his investors that are breathing down his neck at some point, regardless of what happens to you. So he's just gonna throw perks at you to blind you of that, and you're just gonna be like, tee-hee, I have a job, I'm just happy to be here, blah, blah, blah. But really what's going on behind the scenes, and I know it sounds kind of pessimistic, but everyone is trying to make an exit plan and have a successful acquisition so they can make their millions and walk, and then make another company and have that rinse and repeat. And that's how corporate America grows. So here are some key takeaways from this video. If you work at a startup, understand 90% chance of failure and that the CEO needs to pay his money back at the cost of you. Also, you need to ask the burn rate. That is what it's called. Every startup should have a transparent burn rate, which means this is how much money we have in our bank account and this is how much it costs us to run our company. That way you, as an employee at a startup, will have an exact timer on how long you'll have a job. And you should always ask, if you work at a startup, are we looking to get more rounds of funding, or are we looking to increase cash flow, to increase our total company value, so that then later we can go get another round of funding? Or are we going to do an IPO? Or are we being courted by anybody? That's a question that nobody asks. Are we being courted by anybody right now? Are we being looked at for an acquisition or a merger anytime soon? You'll never find out about that again until the last second, because everyone is going to freak out and think that they're not going to have a job, because most likely you're not going to have a job. So those are some questions I would ask your leadership people at your startup. Again, I'm trying to look out for you. Don't get left out in the dust completely. Just be aware. Anyways, if this video has been helpful, maybe click like, click subscribe. Check the description down there if you'd like to support the channel. I appreciate you guys. And that's it. I'll see you guys in the next one.